I'm Melanie Carlos, Executive Director of X-Minds, the organization hosting tonight's event on preschool placements. We have another meeting running right now on secondary school placements. So if that's the session you wanted to attend, you can switch now. Sue will put that link in the chat. First, for the Spanish speakers in the audience, I want to play a recording to give you instructions for finding the Spanish audio channel.
Para escuchar esta presentación en español, acá clic en la opción de menú Interpretación y seleccione Español.
All right. So what we want to bring to you today is a review of all the services that MCPS offers to autistic preschool students. Tonight, you are in the right place to learn about the various placement options. MCPS and X-Minds have partnered to provide you with all the essential information about the programs so that armed with this information, you, the parent, will be better equipped to reassess placement options for your child. Remember, as a parent, you are an important member of the IEP team. The more you know, the more effectively you can advocate for your child when it comes to placement decisions. Our speakers are MCPS staff who know these programs well. We're grateful to have them here taking their time to prepare their presentations and answer your questions. Just as there is a wide range in the support needs of students who are autistic, there's also a wide range of placements that MCPS offers to support them. Presenters tonight will cover the Preschool Education Program, otherwise known as CAPP, and the next presentation will cover the Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program, otherwise known as CAPP. These programs are arranged roughly in order from those that provide least support to those that provide the most support. But please remember that in practice, there is overlap among the programs. We have asked our presenters to minimize specialized terminology, but if you hear something you don't understand, please ask for clarification. I know many of our listeners are new to special education and may not yet be used to these specialized terms. We will be taking Q&A, and you can write your questions in the chat. We've asked speakers to provide detailed descriptions of each program and to highlight key differences between them. Please be aware, however, that programs may vary to some degree from school to school. When you write your questions in the chat, we will read them out loud to the presenters, or you can raise your hand and our moderator will call on you. When you ask your questions, just a note, keep in mind the following. The presenters know all about the programs that they run, but they don't know your child. While they can answer questions about their programs, they will not be able to say much about where your child will fit best. Finally, before we start the presentation, I want to quickly mention we are recording this in both English and Spanish, and we'll make the recordings and presentation slides available to you in a few days. This year, we are happy to have an introduction to preschool services by Ms. Amy Kropp, Director of the Division of Pre-K, Special Programs, and Related Services. She will take a few minutes to give you a bird's eye view of autism services for this age group. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Amy. I'll hand it over to you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Melanie, as always. It's my pleasure to bring on behalf of the Office of Special Education a warm welcome. The Office of Special Education highly values this longstanding partnership we have with X-Minds. Going back many, many years, predates me. And one of my strangest memories is getting ready for the annual X-Minds Forum right in March 2020, when this thing called COVID was on the brink. So I'm very pleased to be able to pivot to this kind of a forum, which I think really meets everybody's needs too. X-Minds and MCPS share the common goal of ensuring parents have a great understanding and awareness of the kinds of services available to their children with autism spectrum disorders in MCPS. MCPS, like everywhere, is seeing a very significant increase in students with autism. We know that that's worldwide. We also hear from a lot of families who tell us they're coming to Montgomery County specifically for the services that we offer, for the broad range of continuum, which is very gratifying to know that they're coming from different states, from different counties around us. And we take that very seriously, that we know we are serving a broad range of students and their families. Tonight, you're going to hear about the broad continuum of services we provide to make sure that our students are prepared for, this is interesting to think about a preschool student, but really that students are prepared to leave us as valuable members of our community, whatever adult path they should take after graduation. You will hear a shift in our language. You will hear us intentionally speak about services rather than programs. And we intentionally do that to communicate that what we're offering is special education services. A program is a place. Services are what we offer and deliver to our students in terms of specially designed instruction and related services. So the children make progress on their IEP goals and objectives. So you will hear us really talk about the services we have, which are the services, not a program is a place. We really offer a broad range of services that you're going to hear about tonight. And MCPS, like X-Minds, very highly values family engagement. We are very happy to always speak with families in this kind of forum or other forums, because we know that a better informed community helps us mutually. And we know that networking opportunities like X-Minds can offer is really, really important to families, and we value that too. I would certainly like to thank the president, Nora Dudwick, Sue Keisler, vice president, and Melanie Carlos, executive director of X-Minds, who really we share the values of making sure that our families are really well informed and keeping us accountable. So I also want to thank MCPS staff members who are here, both those presenting, and also I know some who may join us just because they're invested in our work too, after a long day of teaching in the classroom. So I want to thank you to everyone for joining us, and I know you will hear a lot of good information. Please, I hope that it meets the needs, and I know that X-Minds is really good about offering feedback so that we can take it back in how we communicate and make sure we help our parents understand, so you can help us. This slide here is the percentage by services of students with autism, primary code of autism. What you're going to see really here is that our students are everywhere. Students with autism are everywhere in the school system, and largely they're in their home schools. They're largely receiving specially designed instruction and related services right in their home school. Whether that's a 5th grade classroom or a 9th grade geometry class, with whatever supports are needed by their IEP. But you can see there's a broad range of continuum, with really most students learning right alongside their peers. Next slide. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mary Rose Katina, the coordinator of the Preschool Education Program, or PEP, and she will be able to talk us through the continuum of services within PEP, and then we'll pass it on to learn more about CAPP. So thank you, Mary Rose.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Rose Katina. I am the coordinator of the Preschool Education Program, or as we affectionately call it, PEP. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about the continuum of services that PEP provides to meet really a wide range of needs for our students who have developmental delays or disabilities, including students who are considered to have a disability of autism. And we're really looking at those students being able to learn and access the pre-kindergarten curriculum. The services really range from being provided in regular early childhood settings, which is what we call general education settings at the preschool level. And then we have self-contained classrooms for the students that do need that level of service. All of our classrooms, all of our services follow the general education pre-K curriculum in MCPS, which is aligned to Maryland's early learning standards. And the overarching goal of all of our services is to prepare the students for kindergarten and for school, and actually, you know, for their life, their career, and the community as they move on when they get older. Next slide. So I'm going to start with our PEP itinerant services, and these are services that are provided in community preschools, childcare settings, or within our MCPS pre-K Head Start classrooms sometimes. There are we have special education teachers and related service providers who provide direct services to students in these regular early childhood settings. The services are aligned, of course, to the IEP goals. They're typically provided once or twice a week. And these services are typically recommended by IEP teams when a student has minimal goals and objectives that can be, you know, their needs can be met in a regular early childhood setting with a minimal amount of service, with that direct service provided by one of the providers. Our staff also work with the community preschool or with the childcare or with the pre-K Head Start staff to talk to them about strategies that they're using, things that they've discovered are helpful to the students, and that when the special educator or when the related service provider is not there, that they can use with that student in their setting that will help them to learn and grow and to meet their goals. Our next set of services I'm going to talk about are our PEP inclusive pre-K services. And these services are also provided in a regular early childhood setting, a general education setting, and they're provided in a fully inclusive general education pre-K or Head Start classroom. So we work very, very closely in pre-K special ed with our partners in early childhood general education and MCPS. And with this particular set of services, our students are fully included in a general education classroom. These are students who are in their pre-kindergarten year, meaning that they're getting ready for kindergarten. It's their year before kindergarten. And there is a part-time, half-time special education teacher and a half-time special education paraeducator who are assigned to this particular setting, to this class, and they work very closely with the general education staff. They co-plan, they co-instruct, and they co-assess, and they really use co-teaching models to help the students to be successful and meet their goals and objectives. So there are supplementary aids and services, there are accommodations, everything is provided in that setting. Again, the IEP teams will typically recommend these services when it's determined that whatever specially designed instruction the student needs, really those needs can be met in a general education setting. So they're looking at their strengths and needs, they're looking at what kind of strategies are needed, they're looking at their IEP goals and objectives, and then determining what kind of services they need, and that they can be met in a general education setting. Next slide. We also have another type of inclusive setting called PEP collaboration. And, you know, part of the reason that you'll see that we have so many of these different types of services for general education settings, because we want to serve as many students as possible in regular early childhood settings. And, you know, preschool is different than school age in the sense that preschool is not mandatory. So there aren't just general education classrooms fully everywhere throughout the county. So again, we work very closely with our general education partners to be able to really create as many inclusive settings as we can to have these options available for our students when the IEP teams determine that a regular early childhood setting is what will meet the students' needs. So what happens here is that there is a special education classroom that that's taught by a special educator and a special education paraeducator. And there's a general education classroom taught by a general education teacher and a general education paraeducator. And they work very, very closely together. Again, they co-plan so that they're always teaching the same things. And they create heterogeneous groups of their students, where there are students from the general education classroom and students from the special education classroom that form a mixed group. And those students, they alternate weeks where those students are taught by the special education staff or the general education staff. And then they switch the following week so that the students are taught by both teachers, they're taught by both paraeducators, and they're mixed in a heterogeneous group. So their students with IEPs are with their typically developing peers for instruction. And as I said, they have to co-plan. Go back one second, Susan. They have to co-plan so that their needs can be met, so that all students are getting the same thing. And again, these services are recommended when the IEP team determines that the student needs their specially designed instruction in a regular early childhood setting. Okay, next slide. We also have something called PEP Pilot. And these services this is also a general education, regular early childhood setting. Typically the students in these classrooms are younger students. So they're typically the ones who are not getting ready to go to kindergarten the following year. And these services were really created so that our younger students would have an opportunity to be in regular early childhood settings. We don't have a wide range of 3-year-old classrooms in general education in the county right now. So the way that we've created this opportunity for our younger students who need to be in a gen ed setting is by inviting community peers to come and be part of these classrooms. So they come to our classes, and our students with IEPs are recommended for these services. And together, we have these community peers, we have students with IEPs, and we form a really nice inclusive setting for our younger students. These are half-day classes, or a part day. So they're 2.5 hours a day. And they're Monday to Friday. Next slide. Okay. So, as I said at the beginning, our goal, the law, what we're always striving for is to serve as many students as possible in regular early childhood general education settings. And we always start there. Our IEP teams are charged with starting there. But sometimes we know that students, their needs really can't be met in a regular general education setting. And that's when the IEP team really has to look at the services that they've determined being delivered in what's called a separate class or a self-contained special education setting. We do have a set of services called PEP Classic, and these are self-contained separate classrooms They're taught by a special educator and a para-educator. They are part-day classes, so 2.5 hours a day. Some are in the morning, some are in the afternoon. And as I said, you know, the IEP team, students recommended for these classes are when the IEP determines that the students, based on their goals and objectives and their strengths and needs, the strategies they're needed, that they need to be in a setting that is a little bit more, it's a little bit of a smaller setting, and it's taught by a special educator and a para educator, and it is a self-contained setting. We also have our PEP intensive needs classes, which we call PEP Inc. These are also a set of services that are taught by a special education teacher, but there are 2 para educators that are working in the classroom with the teacher. It is a self-contained separate class setting. And these services are typically recommended when a student really has multiple needs across various learning domains. And they do require significant adult support to meet their goals and objectives. And, you know, again, that their goals and objectives really the IEP team believes cannot be met in a regular early childhood setting. These are also part-day classes that are 2.5 hours a day, also morning and afternoon. And they, excuse me, both the classic and the intensive needs classes are mixed ages of, you know, students who are younger, as well as students who are getting ready to go to kindergarten. And then the last set of services that I'm going to speak about are called our PEP full day services. So these are full day classes. They're on the regular bell times of the schools, of the elementary schools. They are taught by a special education teacher. There are 2 para educators also working in the room. And the idea of the full day is that these classes are really for students who need a lot of opportunity for repetition and practice throughout an entire school day. They're typically recommended when an IEP team feels that a student really has substantial global learning delays that are across multiple learning areas, and they require a lot of significant adult support. And again, a lot of repetition and practice, hence the longer day. So I think that is the end of my slides. And I think we wanted to try to do, if there were any questions in the chat, that before Susan Mason gets started talking about CAPP, that I could possibly answer.
Be great. Thank you. So we actually only have one question in the chat thus far, but I just want to let everyone on the Zoom know that feel free, please, to raise your hand if you do have a question that you want to ask, or again, add it in the chat and we can ask it for you if you prefer. A parent asked about regarding PEP, what processes the county has in place to make sure that educators are certified to teach special education. And I think that question, I can't, you know, I can't read the mind of the parent asking, but particularly now, I think when we have a shortage of people certified in special education, I think parents are wondering, you know, has anything changed based on the shortage? If you could share that with families, that would be great. Thank you.
So, you know, special education teachers, you know, do require certification. But it is true that there is a shortage of teachers now and a shortage of special educators. We do have teachers right now who are, one of the big things that the county is very big on is, you know, if we have staff who are working in, our para educators, and we want to grow them. And we have a lot of partnerships in the county with universities where teachers are working towards their certification and working and going to school in programs that are partnerships with universities and with MCPS. So we do have teachers right now who are in these particular university partnership, programs that are, so they're going to graduate as, and become fully certified special educators. But they're currently in school. Now that's, obviously not all our teachers, but that is some of the teachers. So that is one thing that the county is really doing, is really striving to look at our para educators that are very talented and try to say, hey, let's think about doing this and moving on to become a teacher. Amy, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was a great answer of, we are, you're right, there's a shortage nationally of special education teachers, and particularly special education teachers. Fortunately, a lot of special educators want to work with little kids, and it's, we have been able to staff our classes pretty nicely. There is also, so our teachers, we aim to hire teachers with the special education certification, early childhood special education certification. And Mary Rose is right. We have gotten incredibly creative over the years to meet the ever rising need.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have a couple of other questions. One parent asked a very specific question, so I'm going to try to make it more generalized. But this particular child is autistic and is currently enrolled at a program and has been identified as needing additional support. It's unclear whether there's an IEP in place or not. And the parents wondering, it seems like it's more of a professional development question. What kind of supports are in place for educators who are looking to provide the necessary accommodations? And again, it sounds like a general question, but I'm not sure if it sounds like the IEP may not be in place yet. And if the parent wants to add or anything more specific, I'm happy to add that as well.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the question. I think as far as our teachers, our paraeducators, we are continually providing professional learning to them. Not only we do have certain days set aside for professional learning for our staff members, but we also do a lot of job embedded professional learning with staff from my office working in classrooms and helping to support the staff. We have some coaches that have a coaching program developed to be able to work with staff. We also, as I said, throughout the presentation, we work very, very closely with our general education partners. So we're always working with them, that their general education teachers as well are learning often this, alongside our special educators and paraeducators, so that when there are students who have not yet been identified for services, and maybe they won't even need the services, but they need some support in the classroom, that we can try to work together to help to, so everyone is growing and we're all working for kids. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
So. And again, to the parent who asked the question, please feel free. We'll have additional Q&A time at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Anything else right now, or
I think right now, we can continue.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Mason. I am an instructional specialist with the Autism Services Unit. And I'm going to talk to you about the Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program known as CAPP. And one of the things that makes us a little bit different from PEP is that we provide intensive individualized services for students that are 3 to 5 with autism, or sometimes those who are being served under the educational category of developmental delay. And these students require a full day of evidence-based instructional practices that are supported by behavioral supports. And to maximize that independence in all areas of development, the focus of CAPP is to increase language, learning, and adaptive skills, and to provide access to a variety of school-age services. So when we talk about our classes, we're located in neighborhood schools that serve all types of learners, but our students are attending a program that receives their instruction in classrooms without typical age peers with them. And they're taught almost exclusively by special education staff members, with the exception of things like art or music or PE. And the students are also receiving any speech, OT, or PT services. So in case you don't know those jargon words, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy as specified on their IEPs. And they sometimes receive those services within the classroom. Sometimes they are pulled out by that service provider, but that's something that's determined by the service provider, and the services themselves are identified on their IEPs. Our students typically turn best when they are learning instruction that's presented in a very individualized way. It's often not in context. We teach it first out of context and then bring it into context so that we have more naturally occurring situations for them to take those skills that they've learned and then apply them in a more natural situation. And we do have students that need to have a lot of practice to learn those skills and to maintain those skills. We've practiced those skills across our staff. We practice it with different types of instructional materials, because our goal really is to get that language increased so that they have more opportunities to access that instruction. So our students, again, may have very significant needs in the areas of adapted skills. So those could be things like toileting, toothbrushing, hand washing. They sometimes have behaviors, and those behaviors are usually a result of not having good, strong communication skills. So they do have the needs in communication. And also an artifact of that is also the social skills piece. So when you have communication deficits, you also have social skill deficits, because you don't have that give and take of a conversation with other children. And they often don't pick up on cues to play with other children. So they're accessing a pre-K curriculum that has significant modifications, and that includes those instructional accommodations on their IEP, their supplementary aids and services on the IEP. If they're using any assistive technology like a picture symbol or a board to communicate or a voice output device, those are indicated on the IEP, as well as the related services. And so when they are learning in our program, we're taking all of that into consideration, and we oftentimes are working on skills like teaching them how to use the toilet, how to wash their hands, how to become more independent in those areas. We work very hard on the communication piece of things, because we know that's the critical piece for our students. They need to have that instruction in how to communicate, but it's not always something that they learn to do orally. Sometimes they learn to communicate with what we call assistive technology, so a picture symbol or a picture exchange. And we try very hard to still teach them those oral pieces, but we want to give them whatever it is that's going to help them to communicate. So we start out with them in a way that we refer to as a multi-opportunity, multiple use of devices for them to learn to speak. So, okay. The instruction that we provide for them is typically individualized, and it can be in dyads, but there's approximately 4 hours of the day that provides them with additional intensive instruction. And that is part of their full day. So they're there for the full day, and for about 4 hours of that day, they're getting more intensive instruction. And that instruction is, again, individualized based on their IEP goals and objectives. We do provide group instruction daily as appropriate. We include our students in lunch and recess with support from our staff. Our students can participate in art, music, and PE and media that's taught by their content teachers, so those teachers that are familiar with those things, but with appropriate support from our staff. And again, we use those methods that are common to teaching from applied behavior analysis. We do a lot of direct instruction that is different than your traditional approach to instructing students. We repeat a lot of our instruction so that they really learn those skills solidly. We're very highly systematic about the way that we teach our students. We rely heavily on additional curriculum that come from what we call the Verbal Behavior Milestone Assessment Placement Program. And that's also aligned with the basic learning and language and learning skills that help us to pinpoint areas of communication and language needs for our students and those social needs for our students. So we want to teach them things like how to listen, how to follow instructions, how to grow their vocabulary by recognizing things first receptively, and then learning to use whatever multimodality it is that they need to communicate with us in order to express what they know. Again, we're teaching them almost exclusively by special educators, but they do have their related services who plug into that day and give them their speech language, occupational therapy, or physical therapy if it's on their IEPs. And their other courses like art, music, PE are taught by our gen ed teachers, but with support from us. I do want to let you know that a typical day for our kids might look like we meet them at school, we meet them to bring them down to the classroom. We're teaching them that independence piece. We want them to learn to be more independent. So we're working with them to understand that they're going to take care of their backpack. They're going to hang up their coat. They're going to put their lunch away. They're going to engage in kind of an arrival routine. And we try and get them to do that as independently as possible. And so then we also are incorporating those things like toileting needs. So we might be prompting them through a toileting sequence so they learn to use the bathroom. We work on their hand washing skills. Some of our school students will be working on things that are more independent skills. So if they're really good at puzzles or folder games, we may give them that type of thing to grow that independence to work by themselves. But they're also going to get that instruction that's intensely directed towards them and unique for them based on their IEPs. So we might go from that arrival time into a morning meeting. That morning meeting usually is something that works on things like calendar skills and finger play songs and imitation. They learn days of the week, they learn the weather types of things. And it's an opportunity for them to learn to interact with one another because we can have them recognize and greet each other. We go from that sometimes into centers that are in one section of the classroom, but also broken out are those times where we have them working more individually with a staff member on those really core language skills that involve things like matching, receptively identifying things, following receptive directions. Sometimes that's a motor imitation type of thing where they learn that motor imitation and then we go on to a direction that involves that same imitation. But this time, instead of having them imitate it, we're saying, show me how to do that. We go back and forth between those things. They are getting content from the gen ed curriculum. So they're getting Eureka Math. They're getting the reading pieces that are from the curriculum. We're practicing their writing skills with them in terms of just learning how to sometimes hold an implement, make a line on a paper, scribble. And again, that's all individualized to their needs. Sometimes we have a story time that helps them to learn to listen to a story, but we're also incorporating things like them recognizing the pictures in that story. And we have oftentimes a dismissal circle. So they're saying goodbye to one another and they're learning that dismissal routine of packing their belongings up into their backpacks, putting on their coats, and then getting onto the bus or being picked up by you as a parent. So students are taught by different staff members throughout the day, but that teaching is very individualized to them and it's very intensive. And our students tend to be the students who really require a lot of support to learn.
Great. So we have some more time for Q&A and we do have some questions, but I just want to remind everyone on the Zoom, please feel free to add more questions in the chat, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and we happy to have you ask your own question. So one parent is inquiring about the school system's policy about outside providers pushing into the classrooms and is wondering why outside providers, private professionals are not allowed to push into classrooms.
Sure, I can address that. You're right, there is a school board policy. So our elected board has had a long-standing policy that tutors and other direct providers of services for children aren't permitted to be employed during the school day. And that's for a lot of reasons, disruption, other things, but really we take our responsibility to provide your child with what they need during the school day. And that aligns with the board policy that tutors and other teachers and private teachers and things aren't permitted to be employed during the school day by parents. So that's a school board policy.
But just to follow up, if a practitioner wants to observe, right, that is allowed.
That's
Just so
absolutely
parents
allowed.
know.
Yeah, it's actually the same policy, covers both things, but yes, absolutely, arranged with the principal. Typically, someone will always be with the parent to, sort of help guide and all that and show them around. And so it's arranged with the principal. And then there's the school visitor management policy where you show, you walk into the office, you show your driver's license, sign in and all that. And then absolutely, that's a great way to learn.
Great, thank you. So another parent was wondering about some of the methodologies in place in the classroom, particularly I know in CAPP you mentioned that it's an ABA-based model, but do you mind sharing a little bit about some of the other, this parent in particular wanted to know in particular about more neurodiversity affirming models in the classroom. If you could just talk generally about, how ABA is used and also other methodologies that are employed in all of the preschool programs.
So in the CAPP program, that ABA is used, really we focus very hard on reinforcing skills with things that we identify that a student is motivated for. So when a student first comes to us, we spend a lot of time getting to know them getting to know us. We might follow them and see what they do. We make a list of the things that they like to engage in, and then we use those things to reinforce the responses we're trying to teach when we're teaching them. That ABA methodology in our teaching, we actually use something that's referred to as errorless learning. So we prompt them at a level where we know they'll be successful, and then we fade back on that prompt to get them to do things more independently. Again, reinforcing for the things that we want them to know and own. But if they make a mistake, we'll go back and show them how to do it, and we'll ask them to try it again, and we'll always reinforce them at least for effort. So that's really the way that our applied behavior analytic methodologies are integrated into the classroom. It's all about the reinforcement. It's all about giving them the right level of prompting so that they can be successful.
Great, thank you so much. Another parent is inquiring about how children who have feeding challenges are supported in the classroom. Regarding more like, for example, kind of pickiness or independent feeding skills. And I'm assuming this also maybe in the actual act of eating, but also the types of foods that they're able and comfortable ingesting.
We will work with parents if they want to send in foods that their child is having difficulty with eating, but we cannot force them to eat those foods. So we'll ask also that you send something that you know that they will eat. We certainly have students that don't like certain foods. Sometimes there's something that can come up from one of the other specialists, but oftentimes we'll ask parents to work with a feeding clinic about those things because we are not experts in feeding. We'll try our hardest to get them to be more diverse in what they eat. But again, we cannot force them to eat that food, and we will encourage them to eat whatever they can eat and will eat. If it's a situation where the child has more of a motor difficulty of chewing food or swallowing, that is not something we would cover within our CAPP program. It is something we would ask for them to gain insight from an outside doctor or specialist in that area.
So if the child has speech services, that couldn't be a goal on their IEP. The actual active eating or by an OT.
Amy, I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yeah,
now.
sure. Yeah, it might not be a specific goal. If there's the behavioral piece that sort of Susan was talking about, more the behavioral piece associated, many times with an autism spectrum disorder. And then there's that physical, medical, motoric piece. And they're really two entirely different buckets or approaches. And so that motoric or medical piece, our occupational therapists are often sort of our leaders, informal leaders on feeding, and they can talk through they can talk through feeding protocols and kinds of things. We're always guided by the doctors that a family may consult. But so there's that behavioral piece, but then there's really the motor piece that OTs would often be helping the classroom work on. So you wouldn't probably see specific goals about eating a certain amount or a certain type of food, but it would be that occupational therapist expertise that would lend that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is from a parent who is wondering whether PEP and CAPP are year-round, and if not, what options are provided to the family for the summertime?
Speaking for CAPP, we are not a year-round program, but when we go through our IEP meetings, we will talk about what's known as extended school years. So based on critical life skills, things like communication, their self-care skills, their social skills, we'll ask a series of questions that are part of the IEP. And that first one is, does the child have a critical life skill? If it's yes, there are some other questions that follow it. Things like, have we noticed that when they have a break in the school year that they come back and they cannot show those skills and it takes them longer than usual to regain those skills? Have they got something that's called an emerging or a breakthrough opportunity? So maybe they're just learning how to use a special type of communication device, then that would say yes to that. We ask if there are special circumstances, and those are things like being out of school for an extended period of time, maybe being hospitalized or out of the country where they've missed a lot of school. There's a series of, I believe, about 6 questions that follow that. And when you answer yes to any of them, the child qualifies for extended school year. And that's then an IEP team discussion about what that extended school year would look like. How many days a week does the child need? How many hours a day does the child need? How many weeks of service would the child need? And do they need service in special education as well as speech and language and OT and or PT, or is it just one of those disciplines? So it is part of the IEP. It is not considered a year-round service because we're not a year-round service. It's really meant to maintain skills that they've already learned, not to teach new skills.
And I just was going to add that the consideration of by an IEP team for what we call extended school year services, or ESY, is a mandated consideration process for all students with IEPs in Maryland. So it's not specific to CAPP or PEP or some other type of service. It is part of the IEP process in Maryland for every student that IEP teams need to consider extended school year services. And as Susan said, you have to consider about critical life skills. There is a series of other questions that IEP teams need to consider. And then the really overarching question is, if a student does not get these extended school year services, is there the consideration that their services during the regular school year will be significantly jeopardized because it will take them, an extensive period of time to regain the skills that they had when school ended. So it's, as Susan said, it's really for students to maintain the services maintain the skills that they have when they leave school in June.
Thank you. Just to circle back about regarding the feeding question, a parent was asking if you could take a moment to explain the difference between the motor piece we talked about, the actual active feeding, and how that's different from behavior.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for prompting. So the behavior piece is what we often would say, he's a picky eater. He likes he likes soft things, he likes sweet things, he doesn't like vegetables, he doesn't like meat, sort of that pickiness. We, the traditional take off our educator's hat and just call it really picky eaters, that is sometimes so exacerbated for kids with autism. So it's really about the preferences, and just the pickiness would be that behavior. And we would address it sort of from a behavioral lens, like Dr. Mason was talking about. We'd sort of address it that way. Then there's the medical piece where kids really do have a swallowing issue or a chewing issue, from the motor mouth medical lens, which is different. That's different than saying, I don't like carrots, or I don't like mashed potatoes, or I only like beige foods. That's really the act of chewing and swallowing that we need doctors to weigh in, because none of our educators are going to be able to tell us something about, feeding or swallowing. And of course, safety is the most important piece. So our occupational therapists can work on those issues, but really it's a medical piece of, we can't, we need to make sure the child's literal medical structure allows the feeding to be safe. And once we know that, we might say, we all might agree that this is just a picky kid who only likes beige things, or who only likes soft things, or doesn't like to use a fork, and those kinds of things. So we would address it differently. One is much more not in our purview, and that's the medical, just how does your mouth and your body work together to chew and swallow. And that's where we really need a feeding clinic, a medical feeding expert physician to help us, to guide us.
And just for families, the idea of partnership is very important.
Yes, the occupational therapist and have, a lot of training in feeding protocols. They're always going to take their guidance from the parents and the doctors. They're always going to, they're not going to be making any determinations on their own without the parents and the doctors. And often it's, the doctor shares some information and the parent comes in, either, as part of an IEP team, or even just not as an IEP team, just comes in and maybe talks with the OT, and then the OT can help kind of transfer the information into the classroom. But we would be taking our guidance from the doctors and the parents.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So a parent is wondering, I know there is generally a timeline that is followed in the county in terms of assessments and reassessments. This parent is wondering what assessments, kind of, for example, psychoeducational, will be done for the transition, in preparation for the transition to kindergarten.
Okay, well, I can respond to that. I mean, it's very individualized. It is an IEP team decision, and it's individualized for every child. So it's not a standard process that if you're getting ready to go to kindergarten, you get these assessments. IEP teams will meet with families when they feel like there needs to be some consideration of reevaluation. Of course, as you just said a minute ago, that has to happen by law every 3 years. You have to consider assessments every 3 years. That's the law. But also, teams will often ask for a reeval planning meeting with a family because there's questions about a student's skills and functioning, and that information can be helpful for making good decisions for the next for students going to kindergarten, or for the next school year, or for various reasons. Parents also can ask for that because they may feel that they have questions that they want assessments considered, and at that meeting, the parents, guardians, and the members of the IEP team would discuss, what are our questions? And the questions are what drive the assessment. So, do we have questions about a child's cognitive or adaptive functioning that we would need a psychologist involved? Do we have questions about how a student learns, like very specific questions about maybe their impulsivity or their behaviors, or things that we feel like a psychologist would be helpful to be able to look at, are there characteristics of autism there, or characteristics of attention deficit, things like that. There may be questions around students' educational functioning, where really are there, pre-literacy and pre-math skills, their early learning skills. Like, yes, we have classroom assessments and things, but we need to get more information. We really need to look more at their academic skills. So do we need an educational assessment? What about their communication? Do we have good data about their communication and their functional communication, how they use language? Or do we have questions about that? Or does the family have questions that need to be addressed through some formal assessments? So that's all part of the discussion, but it's not mandated one way or the other as to we should do an assessment or we shouldn't because they're going to kindergarten. It's all part of the discussion.
That's helpful. Thank you. If we could just revisit the ESY conversation, a parent, Dr. Mason mentioned 6 questions, and the parent was wondering what the 6 questions are and some examples for ESY eligibility.
Okay, so the first question is, do they have critical life skills? So those would be things like their language, toileting, social skills. There is a question about the regression. Do we see them losing skills when they come back from a break and taking much longer to recoup or regain those skills? And when we say much longer, we're really like, most kids can come back after, let's say, a winter break. And this is true of your gen ed kids too. And they might have forgotten a few things, and you can spend maybe a day or two up to a week to try to get them back on track. These are students who take much longer to regain those skills. There's a question involving whether or not there are some emerging skills or breakthrough opportunities. And typically those are things that we see in terms of this student's really just learning how to use their language, or this student is learning to use that communication device that we've been working on so long, and we don't want them to have that break because we're afraid that without that continued instruction, it won't maintain. There's a question about interfering behaviors, and those things can be as broad as the student has difficulty focusing and maintaining an ability to work in their environment, to more interfering things that might involve things like self-harm or harming somebody else. There is that, I'm trying to roll through these in my head without having them in front of me. So jump in and help me out if you can, Mary Rose or Amy.
There's the question about breakthrough that you mentioned earlier. And the question about special considerations, which you mentioned earlier. And I'm trying to think what I might have missed.
There's interfering behaviors, the regression, the special considerations, the significance of their disability. How disabled are they? So those are the questions that we ask. And then based on those answers, we as a team determine what that ESY would look like. I do want to mention that although we're qualifying a student for ESY, sometimes we have parents that say, I'm not interested, and that's okay. They can decline those services, but we are mandated to do those questions and determine whether the student would benefit from ESY.
And I just want to add again that like that whole part of that process is that once you go through all those questions, you really have to answer that big final question that comes after that about whether there's concern that the students regular services would be significantly jeopardized without the ESY services. So even after you go through all those questions, then you have to answer that additional question.
Thank you very much. Parents just wanted to get an idea for the range of students, the number of students in each placement.
So I can speak overall for our PEP services. Right now, I believe we have about 1,900 students that are receiving all different types of PEP services. And as we've been saying all along, there are students with a variety of developmental delays and disabilities across all the types of services. Because as children turn 3, they can be identified that they are eligible for special education services. We receive children throughout the entire school year. So children may come into our services as late as June. So by the end of the year, we will have more than 1,900 students, throughout the PEP services.
I'll also add that there are many students who do not require, their IEP doesn't require a classroom style of services, and they come to, their primary disability might be a speech language impairment, and they come as a 3 or 4-year-old pre-K student to their neighborhood school, to an elementary school, and meet in a small group, maybe 3 other preschool kids working on their IEP goals with a speech pathologist for something like maybe 45 minutes a week. And those are the services. So you can see they don't require a full program with a special educator, but really it's communication with a speech language pathologist, and those services are available too.
And on the end for CAPP, I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you that we, like preschool services, receive students throughout the entire year, and they can come to us as late as June. But they're based on the IEP team decision. So there's no good way for me to give you a number, because it's always ongoing.
Is the number, though, in CAP versus PEP typically smaller?
We try to keep our number a little bit less than some of the PEP, and Mary Rose, you can explain the differences in terms of your PEP classes, because that ratio changes, I think, across the type of PEP service that it is. But in CAP, we try very hard to keep our classrooms between 6 to 8 students with 1 teacher and 2 full-time paraeducators. And then we have those part-time paraeducators coming in to provide that nearly 4 hours a day of intensive instruction.
Susan, I can answer. We only have 21 CAP classes across the county, and each class has 6 or 7 students, sometimes 8. So we're looking at less than 150 students countywide in CAP. We are a very small program, but we are one of the most restrictive settings for students. So that would make sense. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you. We had talked earlier in the conversation about ABA therapy, and just so all of our families, for those who are unfamiliar with ABA, could you just maybe give a brief description about ABA and what it might look like in the classroom, how it's used?
That's a big question, because ABA is a very broad field.
Right.
So within CAP, it really, as I said before, focuses on that ability to give students skills by reinforcing them with something that they like, and by giving them prompts that we know will help them be successful, and then fading back on our prompts. It's ABA as a therapy is very broad, and it can serve a number of different things. It's not just related to autism. It's been around since 1967. And it's been used to teach people to use a seatbelt buckle. It's been used to teach people how to cope with different stress skills. But in our CAP program, it really is focused on reinforcing the skills that we want them to learn, using things that we know are really strong rewards, or the student gravitates to and is motivated by, and using that prompt level that we know is successful initially, and then backing that off over time so that they become more independent.
And it might, I would assume also, like, I think some families probably have their own ABA providers, and ABA in the classroom might look slightly different than what it looks like when you have a one-to-one aid in a private setting.
It might. I think I've been trying to avoid catchphrases, but one of the things that we talk about in our program is discrete trial instruction, which means that we're giving instruction that's very individualized and has a very clear beginning and a very clear end to it. So it's very circumscribed to that student and specific, and often we teach it out of context first and then pull it back into context, like a play skill. There are certainly other ABA providers that might provide that more naturally within a play class-based instructional environment and not take that discrete trial approach. But all of it is still going to be, if you're talking about ABA, you're talking about principles that are very heavily reliant on reinforcing the skills that you want to teach.
Just as a follow-up, a parent was asking if you have a child who was in a private ABA program and prior to enrolling in CAPP, will staff members work with the private ABA staff in terms of transitioning the child from that private ABA program to the public school in CAPP?
We're always happy to collaborate. There is a form that we need parents to sign that's called a release and exchange of information form that allows us to then participate in that collaboration. So if a provider comes to us without having that in our hand first, we're going to ask the parent to sign that off first before we start that collaboration.
Right. And so another parent is inquiring, and I suspect this goes for many parents on this Zoom, what kinds of resources are available in the preschool for preschoolers with ASD to improve their social cognition? And is there some sort of either formal or informal assessment utilized by MCPS staff to evaluate social skills?
So I can speak to the fact that we have, so there is an assessment in the state of Maryland called the Early Learning Assessment that is mandated that we use in all of our, by MSDE, that we use in all of our preschool, pre-kindergarten classrooms. And it is an observational tool. But it, you know, it has been tested for reliability and validity. And there are several what we call skills, knowledge, and behaviors on there in the social domain. And we are tasked with really looking at those indicators and looking at where students are and working towards where the expectation is for them when they are going off to kindergarten. So our staff are constantly paying attention to those as part of what they need to teach and what they need to help children learn to be able to get ready for kindergarten. In addition, you know, many to most of our students have IEP goals that are in the social domain. And they often are the goals that relate back to these indicators, because this assessment that was designed by MSDE is really based on what you would expect typical 3- and 4-year-olds to be able to do, which is what we're always working towards, to bring our students closer and closer to their actual age expectations. So many of our students' IEP goals are aligned to these indicators. So we are continually working on the social aspect in our classrooms of helping students to get ready for kindergarten and school.
Great, thank you. One parent is asking about how the program supports twice exceptional kids. And for those parents out there who don't know what that means, it means that your child is twice exceptional because they have a disability and they are also gifted.
I can speak to that. Twice exceptional services are typically we don't see diagnoses of twice exceptional in children this young. It really is after that the reading and writing, you know, 2nd, 3rd grade time, not preschool age, that we really see those twice exceptional characteristics, or that we would call something out as twice exceptional. It's really looking at this age. Oftentimes our students have developmental delay categories, which is really looking at what areas have a 25% or more delay in areas of development. So we don't have pre-K services specific to 2E or twice exceptional. But it really is about what are the child's goals. And as Mary Rose said, where is that gap between the age expectation and where the child is performing and narrowing that gap in all the different areas. So we don't call out specific twice exceptional services in children this young.
That said, for those children who appear to be showing behaviors that might indicate later on that they might be diagnosed as twice exceptional. Can you talk a little bit about how a teacher might utilize that?
Oops, you just went on mute.
Sorry.
How a teacher would utilize
The child's strengths to support the child's challenges.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. I think the IEP team would be looking at the child in totality, and saying where are the child's strengths and how can we maximize them? Where, when we talk about the present levels, where are really the child's strengths and how can we play to them while supporting while giving support to the other areas of development. So I think, Mary Rose talked about the social skills, social development, social cognition, pragmatics. Those kind of things would be supported by the team in pre-K, by the special education teacher, speech language pathologist, really addressing the child as a whole with the family.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that's part of the reason too that we have so many different types of services, because in PEP, we have students with so many different types of skills and strengths and needs. And we often have students who are academically on grade level, maybe in math, some slight delays in literacy, but then their needs are really in the social area. So then they might not have goals and objectives for math. They'd be following the general ed curriculum, but if a student is on grade level in math, then that teacher would be looking at, okay, well, what am I going to teach them next? So it's not really, as Amy said, it's not really a twice exceptional set of services, but we're going to look at that child as an individual and where are their strengths and needs and try to address those individual areas of what that particular student needs.
Thank you. We have a parent with their hand raised. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask the parent to unmute themselves. Carla Lopez, you want to go ahead and unmute and...
Sí, sí, buenas noches a todos. Sí, yo escribí eso de mi niño es autista, pero está alto académicamente. Y me llamaron a una reunión del IP para decirme que necesitaban reevaluar a Daniel porque él está muy alto, más que todo de su salón de clase, hasta con niños típicos. Él está muy alto de matemática, en lectura y en escritura, pero pues sí tiene problemas con el lenguaje receptivo y socializando. Y pues yo firmé ahí para que le hicieran la reevaluación, pero también lo que usualmente cuando miran que los niños están altos académicamente en cuestiones de la escuela, lo que hacen algunas veces es quitarle el IP a pasar un 504 y pues eso sí no me gustaría.
Okay, maybe our interpreter Aura could switch to English and translate that question in English for us, please.
Sí, yo estoy aquí. Okay.
What we can also do is take, if we can get Ms. Lopez, if we can get your information,
Ay,
your
no, no le
email.
escucho.
If you want to put your email in the chat, we can have somebody email you directly and help answer any questions.
That would be great. Thank you so much. We will make sure, yeah, we'll make sure that you get Ms. Lopez's information.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we'll get back to you soon.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Lopez also had
Okay,
a
gracias.
question in the chat. Maybe that if our translator can't switch over to the English, maybe we can read the translated version of her comment.
Okay.
Do you see that, Naomi?
Yes, that's Sue translated. So I'll read it out loud.
Oh,
If this is the one, usually the evaluations that schools do on children are every 3 years, but sometimes the IEP team requests an evaluation before age 3 because the child is doing well academically in math, reading, and writing. The child is pre-K. The IEP team can do the evaluation without the permission of the parents. What will happen if the parents of the child refuse and want to wait until the child is 3 years old? Okay, so this is about, I'm hearing before, someone who's an infants and toddler. Infants and toddlers are, the infants and toddlers program provides services, much like we've been talking about, to children who are birth to age 3. And then the children transition, if they still require services, transition to the services we've just been talking about in pre-K. Under age 3, for those infants and toddlers, there is, we want parents to refer their children to the infants and toddlers program, and I can put it in the chat. And that's where someone will come to your house and do an assessment it's a very different assessment when you're talking about a baby or a toddler. You're right there with them, and they'll do the assessment there and have a team meeting, and the parents are the team, to determine what kind of outcomes, where the child needs the support and services, and what outcomes the family and the family is looking to achieve. So it's different between birth to age 3. It's called the Infants and Toddlers Program, and they're all services. They're not at the school. They're not in the school system yet because they're infants and toddlers. I think that's the question.
okay. Thank you so much.
No,
Oh.
no, Daniel
No?
tiene
Okay.
4 años, 5 años va a cumplir, está en pre-kinder.
So maybe if we could connect the two of you
Yeah, that
after
would
the
be
meeting,
great.
I think
I want
that
to,
would be
I want to
great.
make sure I'm answering the right question, so I don't want to leave
Yes,
a
and I want to
question
make
out
sure
there.
all
So
of our families
would be great.
that would be wonderful. Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
So another parent has a question, which is a great question. The child is receiving services in the program. She uses a communication device, but they can't afford to have one at home. And the parent is wondering what kind of resources are in place for parents who want to provide these kinds of devices for their child to use at home. Does MCPS either help provide support obtaining these devices in terms of financial resources, or can MCPS provide the parent with other resources?
So that's a great question. We have a team called Interact, INTERACT, and it's a team of specialists who are working with the small number of students who really are using this assistive technology, the talker that this parent is talking about. And the Interact team member, speech pathologist, or special education teacher, is working, the talker, the device is only as good as the child has access to it across all of his communication venues. So the Interact specialists, the Interact team, work really closely with the school team and the parents. And sometimes the devices are transferred back and forth. The child takes it home with him or her. So sometimes the child's device goes back and forth with the child. And sometimes our Interact specialists can help families, identify resources or find ones that are really similar that can be, purchased. But if a child is really using that assistive technology device the way we want, and it's it's their own communication tool, then we're going to need to make sure that there's carryover between the home and the school, or it wouldn't make a lot of sense for us to help the child generalize if we're not able to do that. So the Interact team and the teacher would be the ones who would lead that discussion. So the parent, definitely reach out to your teacher.
And also, I was going to say possibly also the parent educator in the school would be able to have that information as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
every student, every school with PEP services particularly has a parent educator who's really there as the resource for the parent to help. You know, this is a complicated world, this world of IEPs, and the parent educator, one of his or her jobs is really to help make sure that parents can get as much guidance as possible as early as possible. And they really, the parent educator knows the child very well, gets to know the parents very well, and can really be that source of information. So they're always a good go-to.
And I'm going to add that for the CAPP program, people like myself, the program specialists that support those sites also can be a point of contact, but the teachers are your first go-to.
Thank you. And I just want to add, a couple of parents had asked about the definition of social cognition / pragmatic language. I just wanted to share with everyone that that's basically, those are the functions of any kind of the language centering around social communication, and social cognition is really, they're one and the same. But please feel free to ask follow-up questions if that wasn't clear. So I think that the rest of the questions we have on here can probably be answered in the chat, but I just want to welcome any more questions via chat or raised hands. Oh, there's one question about the availability in Montgomery County of the CAPP program, and the parent wants to know, is the availability fairly spread out throughout the county, or is it more concentrated in one particular area?
We have locations throughout the county, so we serve schools that we would call up county, so Germantown area, Gaithersburg area. We have sites down in Silver Spring area, more centralized areas, and we try and keep those sites spread out so that when we're taking students from their neighborhood school, we have as close to proximity to that child's neighborhood school as possible, so they're not sitting on a long bus ride.
And it's the same that, you know, PEP is so large and we have so many different services that we are spread throughout the entire county not at every school, but at many of the elementary schools throughout the county.
And where you live, when with your first IEP team, where you live or want your child picked up, because transportation is available from pickup to drop off. That really will tell us what school you would be assigned to. So we would look at the address where you want the bus to pick up your child, either a childcare or your home, and that would really tell us, oh, the bus ride is going to be shortest to this school, and that's how we assign children to schools.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Amy, just a little bit of switch. I was able to copy and paste from the chat into Google Translate. So I've given you the Google Translate version of what that question was, and that might be helpful because it looks like it's a question about being evaluated without parent permission.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. So this is about, there is certainly no circumstance where a child would be getting a standardized kind of assessment without the parent consent. The IEP team has to, like Mary Rose talked about, sit down. Parents are part of the IEP team. Everybody, parents and the team, talk about what questions they have that will help develop the best IEP. And then at the table right there at the IEP team, they will determine together what kinds of assessments, a speech language assessment, a psychological assessment, are necessary. The only assessments, when we talk about assessments, the classroom-based, the teachers do assessments on children, informal and for, you know, kind of like classroom-based assessments that every child participates in. But those are classroom kind of teacher given assessments. But the assessments, individual assessments with a child, have to be determined by the IEP team and have to have parent consent.
Great to know. Thank you very much. Someone wanted to ask, and I hope they will chime in if I'm not getting this question right. I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I think I have some idea. I think this parent is wondering about what kinds of behavioral supports are offered within the program.
So I
That's
think
pretty broad.
it goes back to what are the skills that we're hoping that a child will gain in the social domain and in their social emotional learning. And we're always working towards teaching students appropriate social skills and appropriate behaviors and preventing any challenging behaviors. So we use really what are basic classroom practices that are good for all kids to help kids to be successful and learn, to prevent challenging behaviors, to teach children, appropriate social skills. And then some children need more and more specifics. So then does a child, need a social story? Is a social story something that would help them to be able to learn about what would be an appropriate way to come off the bus or something like that. And then, we do have sometimes students who need more intensive behavior supports. And again, it's about like, why is the child demonstrating this behavior? Because there's always a function, right, to behavior. And then what do we want to do to prevent the behavior from occurring? And to teach the child something that's appropriate to replace that behavior. So, excuse me. That's always, that's a part of all of our classrooms, to be able to provide structure, to create routines, that will help children to be successful. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, and if that parent wants to add, a second part of the question, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat so we can make sure it's answered for you. A parent had a question about what happens. Well, they asked about whether there are private schools for autism in Maryland, which yes, there are private schools that focus on supporting autistic children. But this parent wanted to know, basically, I think, what happens if a school finds that if MCPS feels they cannot support this particular child with autism, what happens in terms of referring this child to a private school for MCPS funding? How would that work?
I'm happy to answer. It really is no different than in school age, in kindergarten on up, when our charge is to serve all children and make sure that all children have a free, appropriate public education. And we want to do that in the least restrictive setting possible, with general education peers as much as possible. And then we have this continuum of services we talked about. If the MCPS IEP team determines that the child's needs can't be met with any of the services that MCPS has to offer in this big, wide, broad continuum, if the IEP team determines that MCPS cannot provide a free, appropriate public education to the child, then it is our job to look outside to make a referral to a non-public or a private school that can meet the child's needs. So we always look to, our goal and our charge, and the law tells us we must provide that free, appropriate public education, wherever that is. And if the IEP team determines that we can't do that within MCPS, then it is our charge to offer that to families.
So I'm not sure I have a full grasp on this particular question, the next question, but I'm going to make some inferences, and I hope that the parent will raise their hand or just interrupt if I'm not getting it right. So if a teacher needs support from a specific specialist, and that particular specialist is not available within the school setting, how does MCPS then support the challenge for the student / making sure that the teacher gets the right supports that they need if the specialist is not actually in the school?
So I think so I think that, again, our charge would be, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I think that, our charge is to make sure that that we're offering that child an appropriate education. So the IEP team is who and what, and the parents are part of the IEP team, determine what the child needs. And then it's determined how those needs are met. Truly, we have so many specialists. I mean, you heard me talk about the Interact team, that really, it's a hard question to answer. Really, the IEP team, which includes the parents, makes a determination about what the child should be working on and with what services. So it really is at that place, at that IEP team table, that any specialized expertise, consultation, any of that kind of thing would be discussed.
Okay, and I don't know, I see that we're past our 8:30 time. Melanie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
I just wanted to wrap it up because I want to respect everyone's time here tonight. And it is 8:33, a little bit after what we had when we said we would finish up. But I want to thank you for answering everybody's questions, and thank you, Naomi, for facilitating that. So I just want to say, again, thank you to everyone who presented. I think you shared so much information, so much important information. And it's, let's face it, it's sometimes very difficult for parents to get this information. So we really appreciate you being here tonight to answer questions. Special thanks to Amy Kropp as our special guest administrator tonight. And I also just want to, she's not here, but I want to do a shout out to Chris Secan, Supervisor of Autism Services, and her staff who've been collaborating with X-Minds for a while to serve the autism community, and certainly did a lot of work to help put this event together with us. I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to complete a short 3-question feedback form. Sue put that link in the chat, so you should be able to just click on that. It's very short. We've recorded this presentation and we'll email you a link to the recording in a few days, as well as a link to the slides. Please join us on Thursday this week at 7 p.m. to learn about MCPS special education services for elementary school students who are on the autism spectrum. And then finally, I just want to let you all know that March 19, save the date, is the kickoff to our anti-bullying series. And it is an event, the whole series is co-sponsored with our friends at the Autism Society of Maryland. And we will be having Dr. Stephen Shore present what he's learned about bullying. You can find all our upcoming events on our calendar at xminds.org. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight.